Hello, I'm Msgr Jim Lisante. Today on Personally Speaking, I'll be joined by the Tony-nominated actor Brian J. Smith, who's best known for his role as Will Gorski in the Netflix series Sense8. Please stay with us. Hello and welcome to Personally Speaking. I'm your host, Msgr Jim Lisante, and actor Brian J. Smith joins me now. Brian grew up in rural Texas and is a graduate of Juilliard. He starred in the Netflix series Sense8, the Jason Bourne spin-off series Treadstone on the USA Network, and most recently in BBC One's World War II drama World on Fire. Brian made his Broadway debut in 2008 in Come Back, Little Shiva, and received a Tony and Drama Desk nomination for his performance as the Gentleman Caller in the 2013 revival of Tennessee Williams' The Glass Menagerie. He's here with us today to talk about his life, his career, living his truth, and the values that matter the most to him. Joining me now, I'm so pleased to welcome to Personally Speaking the wonderful actor Brian J. Smith. Brian, in preparing for these shows, I sometimes try to find out whatever personal stuff I can. And as chance would have it, one of my oldest friends living on Long Island is an actress named Margaret Colin. So last night I text Margaret, and Margaret apparently was in obviously the columnist with you and Gossip Girl. So I said to her, "Hey, this guy Brian J. Smith, who I'm interviewing, is he a decent guy?" And Margaret writes back to me today, and she says, "No, he's not decent. He's a great, great human being." Oh. So I just wanted you to know she sends her love at the beginning of the show. And
lies. It's all lies.
She's a great. And for our listeners, when I saw Brian with Margaret Colin, who has been on our show a number of times, Brian was playing an undercover Russian in a thing called The Columnist, which on Lithgow as well. And the next time I saw him, he was in his Tony-nominated performance in The Glass Menagerie in the role of the Gentleman Caller. Now, most recently, my mom and I, who are devotees of everything PBS, were watching World on Fire, and there was Brian again. Brian, there are some people who think that the world right now is as crazy as it could ever get. And yet, when you watch World on Fire and you see what the world was like in 1939, 1940, especially in Europe, you see the world's been crazy before. What are we to learn from watching a show like yours about some of the things that we might be frightened of now, like totalitarianism, prejudice, bigotry, power players who sometimes take away human rights? What's behind World on Fire, a program which, by the way, I loved, and you're terrific in it?
Well, thank you. And we're going to do another season of that, by the way. I think they want to get started in January, if possible, depending on the whole Corona situation. So that's really great news. We'll hopefully have more for you.
Yeah, good.
I've thought a lot about this, actually, because I even just the title of that show, World on Fire, sort of describes the way that the world feels right now. And I don't know if this is the most positive way of viewing things, but for me, the takeaway is that these are like, we just kind of don't learn. Like human beings, we think we're such an advanced species, but we should have a lot of humility because we don't really seem to be able to progress in a way. I mean, it's interesting being in a country like Germany, which was, was so awful, like in the 1930s, 1940s, and 1920s, Mm-hmm. And now Germany is one of the countries that has really ridden out this crisis in such a really, really great way.
Yeah.
So I guess people do change, but and countries can get better and can learn from their past. But the world seems very flammable, especially when we're in it, and it's going to keep getting on fire. I mean, we'll solve the coronavirus pandemic, and then there's going to be something else that's going to pop up.
Yes.
There's Trump has children that are probably going to run for president. You know, we're not done with all this. I think we think that we have some problems right now and we're going to fix them come November. And, you know, it's always been screwed up. We're a screwed up species, and it makes for tough life experiences, but it makes for good TV.
Right. And great programs like World on Fire. Brian J. Smith is our guest. Brian, this is the age of the strong man, whether it's the president of Turkey or China or Russia or our own country. And that's what your program is about as well, the effect, the impact that people embracing strong men, whether it's Mussolini or Tojo or Hitler, and you're saying that we keep repeating these patterns of thinking that our problems can be solved by this Superman who leads our country very often off the precipice. I want to move on to something more personal to you, Brian. You are a man of the arts, but that's a risky business. And I'm wondering your family's reaction when this guy who could have ended up being a doctor or a lawyer or anything else chooses the arts. It's a field where, as you know, many people don't work for years. And frankly, with the pandemic, for actors, it's going to be even tougher in some cases. Did you find when you mentioned to your family early on that you had an interest in theater and the arts, that there was support for that kind of a career?
Oh, definitely. My family has always been really supportive and really proud of anytime I'm in something. They, flood my phone with messages. They love it. They've always been really, really cool. They come out to New York whenever they can to see me if I'm doing a play. I was really lucky that way. I think my parents knew that I was just too bizarre a child probably to do anything other than get into the arts. So I think they accepted it long before I did.
That's great. Well, tell me a little bit about these parents, and when you look back on the way they raised you, what did they do right?
Well, they, it's interesting. They were really young parents. I think they were 19 and 20 or 18 and 19 when I was born.
Wow.
And I think something about that really made them super conscious of being good parents. They really wanted to do it right. They really, they were obsessed with being good parents, I think. And they both have such different personalities in a way that I think has benefited me to have a mix of like my dad's personality and my mom's way of looking at the world. A lot of it is just the luck of the lottery, and I'm really glad that those are the parents I somehow ended up with. It worked out good for me.
Yeah, young parents too. That's wonderful. We had a program some years ago called Always Our Children, and guest was Jonathan Wood and his mother Jill. But his father had been Gary Wood, who was a quarterback for the Giants. I mention it because when Jonathan was around 24, 25, his parents went into New York to talk to him and said, "Hey, Jonathan, is there something about your life that you haven't told us that you should?" And he realized what they were getting at. And he said, "You mean the fact that I'm gay?" And they said, "Yeah." And he said, well, I am, in fact. His father, the former athlete, broke into tears. And Jonathan said, "Dad, I'm sorry if you're disappointed. This isn't something I chose." The father said, "I'm not crying because you're gay. I'm crying because you couldn't tell the people who love you the most that you were gay for 24, 25 years. And that's our failure for not letting you know that we would have loved you no matter what." Your own parents and their reaction, similar, dissimilar?
Absolutely similar. I actually got goosebumps when you were reading that because that's exactly how my parents reacted. Your mom and your dad, they know everything about you. It's why it's such an uncomfortable relationship. It's the most uncomfortable relationship of your life because they know more about you than anybody else. And they know things about the way your nervous system works. And my parents knew that I was different and, gay since I was very, very young. It took me a long time to accept it. It was my own struggle and not my family's struggle at all. They were relieved actually when I told them because I think for them, it was like, "Oh God, finally, we're really happy for you that you're, being able to live your truth now."
The wonderful actor Brian J. Smith is our guest. Brian, we had on last week Andy Mientus, largely a Broadway actor, and Andy was saying that when it comes to how people should respond to finding out that their child may be gay, I had used the word tolerance or acceptance, and he said, those are still a little bit on the condescending side. He said, I think that parents should respond with embrace, not tolerance, not acceptance, but embrace. Your parents, it sounded like, more than did that. But for a lot of our listeners around the country who may be parents or grandparents and recognize there's something different or special about their child, as that child that you were, what would you recommend parents do when they have a suspicion that maybe their child's identity is not what they had planned it to be?
I think you got to give them space. I think you got to let them figure it out and let them know that they're loved. If you do those two things, I think that's all you can do, especially with someone who's really struggling with it, because it can be a really jarring experience to have, growing up and not wanting to be what you think that you actually are, if that makes any sense. And it's a really complex experience. And I think the kids just need to know that they're loved, and they need to have some sense that no matter what, that they're going to be accepted by their parents. And I think, my parents did a really good job with that, actually. That was, they were really good parents. I mean, of course, I was growing up in, it was very conservative, Texas in the 1980s and 1990s, which is, culturally, it's not the gay friendliest way to grow up. But my parents were great, and they just let me know that I was loved always. I never doubted that.
So Brian J. Smith is saying to us that the best response is unconditional love, no ifs, ands, or buts. That's something, thank God, he experienced from his parents, and is suggesting that should always be the response. Brian, let's go to the world of arts and the world of acting. Kurt Warner, the great NFL football player, was our guest recently, and he talked about a time when nothing was working for him, and he was stocking shelves in a grocery store and wondering, will I ever get to play football, much less professional football? In every actor's life, I mean, you've been blessed. You've had some great parts, but in every actor's life, there are times that are down times. So when you go for a part you were sure you were right for and you didn't get. How does Brian J. Smith respond to not getting what he went after, disappointment, rejection, and the downtime when the job may not be there?
Well, listen, I when I graduated Juilliard, my first 2 years out of there were really, really rough. One day I ate because I saw $7 wrapped around a cigarette case.
Wow.
Down in Union Square. I mean, I was bartending as much as I could, but I wasn't able to get a lot of shifts in. I was auditioning constantly and getting a lot of rejection, and I still get a lot of rejection, even as much as I've been blessed to work. I mean, I have a pretty low average in terms of job bookings, but I do realize and acknowledge that I really have been fortunate. And especially, once you get rolling and once you work with people, if they have a good experience with you, they remember that, and that leads to other work. You just got to get your foot in the door in that way. And, a lot of problems are, us getting in our own way or feeling that we're entitled to work in this industry. Nobody is. You have to constantly earn it by the way you treat people on set. And it's not just your work. Your work's got to be good, but it's also how you treat people on set. And you'd be surprised. There's a lot of people who really want to work really hard, but they don't treat people well. And that happens.
Maybe that's one of those great values you got from those Plano, Texas parents of yours. I want to ask you too. You had to know, being interviewed by a guy who's a pastor and a Catholic priest. Growing up in Texas, growing up with your parents, was there a particular spiritual journey? Were you guys part of any particular faith or practice?
Yeah, we went to church quite a bit. We were Baptist. My grandparents on my dad's side were very deep Southern Baptists, and I went to Bible school every summer. We went to the Church of Christ for a while, which is, I don't know if it's not the Mormon church. This is the church that they don't believe in instruments.
Oh,
so it was just singing. Yeah, they thought that instruments were somehow something in between people that were trying to sing to God and God. It was
Right.
they just did voices, and it was beautiful. The singing in there was like absolutely amazing. I'm really glad that I had that ethic growing up, and learned a lot of really good lessons from that kind of spirituality, and also saw the darker side of it too. And I guess these days I'd consider myself a pretty convinced atheist and a Buddhist, if you can even consider that a religion.
Okay. Which is a way of life, right?
I think so, yeah.
And a way of life. And I'll work on you, Brian, with this atheist stuff. I'm bringing you back, my friend. I'm bringing you back. But let me take. There's a book by Jeffrey Chu. We had him on a couple of years ago. He's a Baptist guy who went around to Christian churches throughout the country to find out. The name of the book is "Does Jesus Really Love Me?" And he wanted to know where the churches stand in terms of people who are gay, which he is, and does Jesus really love people who are gay? Did you ever, growing up, get a negative view of being gay because of the Christian faith?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, yeah. And that I think that was something that, I wrestled with for a long time. I mean, I really thought I was going to hell. I really, really thought I was going to roast in a barbecue pit in hell for eternity because I, was gay.
Yeah.
And I remember also too, it was in the culture there. I remember reading a pamphlet that was on accidentally, maybe on my friends of my grandparents on their coffee table, that was basically saying that homosexuality is a treatable psychological disease similar to pedophilia. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was maybe 10 years old. I was internalizing these messages from these people that I desperately wanted to accept me, that I was sick and that I was wrong and that I was, going to burn in hell and that I had to fix myself.
Wow.
And that did a lot of damage. And I think that I won't lie. I think I still to this day wrestle with those, guilty feelings.
Brian J. Smith is our guest, a wonderful actor. Brian, about 25 years ago, I had written a column called Lacking Compassion, which was a response to my own church coming out with a document saying that homosexual people were intrinsically disordered, and what negative, terrible language that was to tell anybody. I mentioned that because I got a lot of negative feedback from people who said that I wasn't Catholic enough because I would talk about the church's mistakes and not treating gay people as people. I mentioned that because if that column came out today, in my church, there'd be no blowback at all because someone like Pope Francis has said, no, the homosexual person is an equal child of God and is beautiful in their own right and should be loved and respected. I guess what I'm mentioning that for is Pope Francis, I think, is symptomatic of a big change over the past 20 or 30 years. Does that give you any hope that that the world has come a long way in terms of acceptance, embrace, for the homosexual person, that some of the bigotry, some of the prejudice, some of the intolerance is finally going away?
Oh, definitely. But at the same time, I also really do accept that bigotry and intolerance and things like that are going to be with us forever. Like we were talking about before with World on Fire. I mean, I don't know if this is like a design flaw or a software problem in the human species, but we're never going to get rid of this, so long as people experience fear and, we divide ourselves into tribes and this is going to happen continually. It's a feature of being human. And for me, I have really no problem engaging with or talking with people that might be homophobic, either in a religious stance, in a religious environment or in a secular environment. I really think that, we all need to be able to talk to each other and really listen to each other. I would love for someone to tell me what their problem with homosexuality is. I'm up for listening to it, but we can still disagree, but we can have a conversation. Yeah. And I think that's what's missing right now. We're just not having conversations about these things. We're having shouting matches and it doesn't lead to anything good.
And while Brian J. Smith is right that in places like Western Europe and certainly America, there has been a growing embrace for tolerance, the reality, too, is that there are still parts of the world where to be openly gay is a death sentence. And that continues to go on in 2020. Brian, let's switch on to something else that's interesting. to me anyway, is for those of you who are listening to a show like this, you can't see Brian J. Smith, but he's aging gracefully. But Brian, you're in a career where looks, where looks and youth are worshipped. And I'm wondering, as we all age, how well or how poorly do you embrace the idea that we're not any of us getting younger? And is that something to be frightened of? Is that something to say, I welcome it?
I think I've gotten better at it. I'm 38 now. There's only so much time you can spend as a 38-year-old trying to look and feel like a, 30-year-old. It's just, I think that illusion lingers for a little while. And then by the time you get to your late 30s, you're just like, I see. I got the game wrong.
So you're not frightened of it. You welcome it. Do you look forward to the day when instead of being the young leading man, you can be the character actor?
Yes, actually, I don't think of myself at all as a leading man. I never really have. When I was at Juilliard, I was always playing character roles, crazy people, old people. I was constantly having to transform, and that's really what I love to do. And unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people want to watch, someone who looks like they're in their 30s or 20s really transform out of that. They just want to look at that youth,
right?
Yeah. So you're right. I'm definitely looking forward to the time when I can, take on roles that are more interesting and more complex than just a dude in his 30s with some problems.
One of our most, I thought, interesting guests was Dean Koontz, the novelist, and he talks about the fact that he was going off to a school for engineering for college, and just before he left high school, one of his teachers grabbed him and said, I heard you're going away for engineering, and he said, yes, I am, and the teacher said, Dean, terrible mistake. You are meant to write, and that encouragement helped him decide to change, and obviously he became a hugely successful American writer. But was there anyone in Brian J. Smith's life who along the way said, you have a gift, you have a talent, use it, put it to work, that you have a gift for the arts, follow through? Was there someone in your life to do that?
I had really great teachers. My last year at high school, Carrie Howell and Marie Benson were my theater teachers, and they really noticed that I had a passion for it and that I needed it, and that there was something there that could make it happen for me if I pursued it. And they encouraged me very early on. I had a great teacher, Brad Baker at Collin County Community College, and also Gail Cronauer, who really, really saw something in me when I was around 20 or 21. And Brad especially encouraged me to audition for Juilliard. And then I think getting into Juilliard was kind of one of those moments where you go, oh, okay. Like because actors spend a lot of time thinking that they're just absolute crap. I don't know any actor that really has too much confidence. It's the big secret about this industry. Actors are really insecure people, like comics, but worse. And
that's going pretty far, Brian.
But you have these moments in your life where something like an institution or a director or someone, a producer, will see something and they'll take you in and they'll start to really make you into something. And I think Juilliard for me was that. Was that turning point in my life where I go, okay, this is what you're going to do, buddy. There's no getting off it. Just this is going to be your life. And I'm so grateful that they took a chance on me and they saw something in me, and I owe them everything in a lot of ways.
It was that affirmation, that encouragement that you needed. I promise this is the last question. Brian J. Smith is our guest. Brian, you're 38. God willing, you have this great future acting for many more years to come. But if tomorrow, God forbid, you walked in front of a bus in Berlin and your life was over, how would you like Brian J. Smith to be remembered? The life you lived, you just said a few moments ago, there's only once around the track for us. You try to live it as fully as you can. What's Brian's legacy?
Oh, goodness. Oh, that's so hard to answer now because I feel like I haven't even gotten anywhere close to what I really, really, really want to do and what I really know that I got. But if it happened at this point, I do know, especially like the people around like Sense8, that show that I did, and now like with the Matrix, I mean, it's the same people that I've worked with for years, and it's this family that I'm a part of, and I think that I don't know. I think that they think I'm a good guy, and when people like that think that you're a good guy, I'll take that. Sometimes like lives that are not, really, really famous or really, really rich or really, I think the lives that people live on the margins, but they're good to people and they leave a room better off. I think that those are some of the most impactful people you'll ever meet. And I want to be one of them.
I want to thank Brian J. Smith for being with us. I've seen him on the Broadway stage and on television. Now we have this program, World on Fire. I hope our listeners will watch it. Brian is wonderful in that as well. But I think of all the things Brian shared with us today, for me, one of the most powerful was the whole question of suffering through life and finding a deeper sense of empathy. Brian, it looks like this all-American guy who had it all together, but he's saying he was challenged along the way to be self-accepting. It was a struggle along the way, but it has made him a more caring, more empathetic, more sensitive person, and that's a good thing, and that's a lesson for all of us. Watch him on World on Fire. I hope we have Brian J. Smith, not just for a few more months, but for many more years to come as a wonderful actor. And Brian, thank you so much for sharing some of your life, some of your struggles, some of your happiness, some of your joy with us. And for our listeners around the country, Brian announced earlier today that he was kind of in the Buddhist/atheist mode. I promise you that 2 or 3 years from now, Brian's going to come on the show and I'm going to rebaptize him. And welcome. Brian, I'm reminded we had Stephen Schwartz on, who wrote Wicked and Pippin.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, why, as a secular Jew, was your first musical Godspell? And he said, you don't have to be a Christian to know the world would actually be in much better shape if we actually lived by the teachings of Jesus. And I think he was onto something there. We should all kind of practice a little more of that good stuff, I
totally agree with that, actually. I totally agree.
As we end today's program, I want to thank you all for being with us. If you have any questions or comments about the show, you can send them to me through my website, which is www.closeencountertv.com. To listen to our Personally Speaking podcast with some of our most recent shows, you can also go to YouTube and just look under Personally Speaking with Msgr Jim Lisante and subscribe, please. Personally Speaking is also available as a podcast on Apple Podcasts, iHeart, and Spotify. I'm privileged to serve as host and executive producer of Personally Speaking. Our producer is Lisa Jandovitz. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be with you again next time on Personally Speaking.